Welcome back to another episode of the Home Turf Podcast. I'm your host for the day, Jordan Epp, coming back with another episode of sort of like this cheat sheet series I'm doing where I kind of dig into the opposing team a little bit. Today, I am very lucky to have Luke Cheney on. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
What's up, everyone? My name is Luke. Pleasure being on. I am the sports editor for the Hurricane, which is University of Miami's student newspaper, and I am a reporter for All Hurricanes, which is the Sports Illustrated Fan Nation website for Miami.
And you mentioned you've grown up a Miami fan.
Yeah, so I grew up. Well, I'm from the South Florida area, so and I went to Miami games my whole life. So naturally, I grew up a Canes fan. That's my external fandom has obviously been shifted a little bit now since I cover the team. I'm more of an objective level, but yeah, I've always had that connection with the University of Miami. My whole family went to Miami, so I've always been connected to the school in that regard.
Yeah, awesome. All right, I'm very happy to have you on today. But before we go ahead and get started and get into this, I'm going to have to take a little bit of an ad read because this podcast is sponsored by Hitch. Hitch, it's like Uber, but for longer distances, private or shared rides between cities. Enjoy 30% off your first four rides, up to $50 off each ride if you use code Aggie News 3. That's AGGIENEWS 3. So if you're looking for any way to get rides from one city to another, you can go ahead and use Itch and use the code Aggie News 3 for 30% off your first four rides, up to $50 off each ride. Now let's go ahead and get things started. Let's get into a little bit of a week two recap. So some of the people over here at the battalion, which is where I'm working at, they know that I've been hyping up this Miami team a little bit. Even before the season started, I was like, okay, Miami week three, that's a team we kind of got to watch out for. Now, tell us a little bit about how Miami's done, week one, week two. Not the best competition so far in those games, but Miami's been looking pretty good. So talk to us a little bit about it.
For sure, yeah. So Miami opened their season up against Bethune-Cookman, a lower FCS school. Naturally, Miami dominated 170 to 13. Some things from that game that Miami need to work on. Their tackling wasn't great in that game. Their tackling under the previous coaching staff was notoriously very, very poor. I think Miami was rated as the worst tackling team in the country last year per the PFF rankings. And tackling was again pretty average at best in that Bethune-Cookman season opener. The run game was a huge part in that game. Henry Parrish Jr., Thad Franklin were both key components in that run game. Tyler Van Dyke had an efficient game. Very vanilla offense, I would say, but there's really no need to open up your playbook against a lower opponent like that. Heading into week two, Miami played Southern Miss and a very, very, very sluggish start. Miami was down 7-3 about midway to or midway through the second quarter. A late 2 minute, or I think they scored another touchdown with, I want to say, 3 minutes left in that second half to take the 10-7 lead heading into halftime. And Miami looked a lot more comfortable in that second half, ended up winning 30-7. But there were definitely some causes for concern in that Southern Miss game. Just to name a few, the Miami's outside receivers have not been great thus far throughout the first two games. And that was a question mark heading in just because there definitely was an exodus of talent at the wide receiver position, especially out wide. Charleston Rambo, Miami's leading receiver last year, graduated. He had 1,100 receiving yards last year. It's a lot of production to make up. And in place of that is a lot of unproven talent. On top of that, Jacoby George, who was expected to start for Miami or play a sizable role for Miami, was suspended the first two games. So out wide, Miami's receivers really haven't looked that great. And then the other side of the ball, there are a lot of question marks with the cornerbacks. Tyreek Stevenson, Georgia transfer, played for Miami last year. A lot of high expectations for him this season. He's been doing his thing, but opposite that, or opposite him rather, there have been a lot of question marks. DJ Ivy, who has been the number two starting corner for the Canes, hasn't looked great. He I don't mean to ramble about DJ Ivy, but he has a tendency, and he always has had a tendency, he's a fifth year junior, to really give up inside leverage very easily. He gets beat off his release, and that causes receivers to beat him on slant routes, dig routes, pretty much everything towards the middle of the field. Ivy has a tendency to get torched. So a quick synopsis. That's my quick synopsis on Miami's first two games.
Awesome. Thank you so much for going into deep recap on that. That's a really good like peek into the behind the scenes on kind of how everything's gone. And I kind of wanted to dig a little bit more into part of why I have been so high on this Miami team. I wrote a little article for my personal blog about, how I saw the ACC shaping out just because I thought the ACC was a fascinating conference heading into this year.
Mhm.
And I thought that Miami probably had the best chance of representing that side of the ACC. I was really high on them, but the thing about that is it's largely because of the offense and my belief in Tyler Van Dyke. And Tyler Van Dyke has looked pretty solid so far. Again, kind of limited role as far as, how much he's been doing, but kind of talk a little bit about Van Dyke because I definitely think that he's one of those guys who could be having his name discussed a lot come the off season for the next level.
Yeah, Tyler Van Dyke had one of the best 6 game stretches of any quarterback in the country last season. He got his first start against a Power Five team against Virginia last year due to De'Aaron King's injury. His first couple starts against Virginia, North Carolina weren't great, but there was potential shown there. And then Van Dyke just had an amazing performance against what was then a ranked North Carolina State team, and he just continued that for the rest of the season. I think he finished with 25 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I think 4 of those interceptions were in the his first 2 games as a starter, or first 3 games as a starter. So he really finished the year strong, and the expectations for him coming to this season were huge. Heisman hopes. A lot of mock drafts had him projected as a first round pick. I saw him high as top 5, top 10. So yeah, expectations are really, really high for him. And he's done well so far. He's done well. I didn't like how he played against Southern Miss. I thought it was probably his worst game as a whole since the UNC game last year, just because he did some things that were very uncharacteristic of how he usually plays. He had an interception. He had another near pick just because he really locked onto his primary read when he really shouldn't have. He should have gone through his progressions. And he also was low on some throws, very uncharacteristic of him. But Van Dyke is a sensational player. He's a terrific player. And Miami's passing offense has been very vanilla so far, a lot more vanilla than my liking. But I expect, given that Texas A&M is a much, much better opponent than what Miami has played so far, I expect offensive coordinator Josh Gaddis kind of open up that passing offense a little bit because, like I said, it has looked pretty vanilla up to this point.
One of the biggest concerns I had heading into the season for Texas A&M's defense was how the outside corners would hold up. There's a
Mhm.
lot of young players out wide for Texas A&M. You've been seeing a lot of Denver Harris out wide. Then you also have, some injuries going on there. And I just was very concerned about how they would be able to hold up. And even though if you look at how the passing attacks have fared against Texas A&M, it hasn't been very great. They managed to hold Chase Bryce to, about 100, like less than 150 yards passing after throwing 6 touchdowns in the previous game. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure that the numbers are reflective of, an absence of concern. But on the other hand, you had mentioned about the outside wide receivers for Miami. If you look at the numbers, like just looking at the numbers, only one receiver has over 100 yards so far across the first 2 games of the season. Now, could you just talk a little bit about the, outside wide receivers and how they would need to step up against Texas A&M for, Van Dyke in the passing attack to be able to attack Texas A&M?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll throw out a few names to watch out. First name I want to mention, Jacoby George. I know I think I briefly touched on him earlier, but he is coming making a season debut against the Aggies. Not sure if he'll start or not, just because it is his first game. But I think he has the highest ceiling out of any outside receiver in Miami's room. just such a smooth wide out. I've been such a big fan of him since this past spring. He's really just stood out to me. Some other guys to watch, Michael Redding. He is a very physical wide receiver, about 6'1", 6'2", runs well. Keyshawn Smith, a guy who's a very good runner, north south, not really an east west make you miss guy, but downfield threat nonetheless. Clemson transfer Frank Ladson really had some troubles or some consistency troubles at Clemson, but he looked pretty good in that season opener against Bethune-Cookman. Just not a lot of production there overall. Another guy I'll throw out, Romello Brinson. Super high expectations for him. He was injured throughout spring, and he kind of spent fall camp just catching up to this new playbook. But he's getting more and more acclimated within the offense, and I think he's someone that by the second half of the season really plays a major role in Miami's offense. And then just to briefly touch on the receiver that I think Texas A&M fans should worry the most about is Xavier Restrepo, Miami's leading or second leading returning receiver from last year behind only Keyshawn Smith. But Van Dyke has just a tremendous connection with Restrepo, such a consistent guy in the slot, great hands, very solid route runner, just a guy to watch out for. He's someone that will really just take advantage of soft underneath coverage and make you pay.
And one guy, you mentioned him earlier, but he's really burst onto the scene in the first couple of games. Henry Parrish Jr. at
Yes.
running back.
Mhm.
Now, could you talk a little bit about, what Henry Parrish has been doing so far that's made him successful? How the offensive line is helping him or helping Van Dyke? Just kind of touch a little bit on that side of the field.
Cool. So I might ramble here a little bit, so watch out for that. But yeah, the run game has looked okay so far. I do have a couple complaints, which I'll get into. Henry Parrish has looked very, very good, has exceeded my expectations because I always knew of him and I always considered him more of an outside runner, change of pace type back. But he's really impressed me with what he's been able to do inside the tackles. Has really caught me off guard in that regard, and is someone that is legit every down back because he can do that, which, like I said, I didn't expect. That Franklin is just a tremendous big body bruiser. He weighs in at 240, but he moves much better than his weight would indicate. It's weird. He gained weight over the offseason, but I guess it was good weight because I mean he moves so much better than he did in his freshman season. He has a basketball background, so he is able to catch the ball a lot more effectively than you would think. And then Jalen Nye, Miami's leading rusher from last season, he had a limited role in the Southern Miss game just because he missed that week one matchup against Bethune Cookman with an injury. But Jalen Nye, super talented back, home run threat, someone to watch out for. And then the offensive line was tremendous in that first game against Bethune Cookman. Just phenomenal. Miami rush for close to or over 300 yards around that mark. Pass protection was amazing. Tyler Van Dyke was only hurried one time, no sacks. A great performance. First half, week two, wasn't great for that unit. In the run game, I saw a lot of initial push from that unit, but the problem they had is that they were very eager to get to that second level of the defense, and sometimes they really didn't fully complete their blocks, which led to a couple negative runs that happened. And in pass protection, really, they didn't look good just because Southern Miss is a team that blitzes a lot, that sends a lot of exotic blitzes. They have their stunts, and Miami had a tough time at first communicating on those stunts. Uh, the offensive line was responsible for two of the four sacks that were given up. And those two sacks were allowed because of a lack of communication, one on a stunt and then one just on a complete blown assignment. So definitely some stuff that, you could get fixed up or that could get fixed up in film, but you would like to see more consistency from that unit just because they will be playing just an absolutely tremendous defensive line in Texas A&M, defensive line that talent wise they haven't faced before anywhere close to that level.
Yeah, no, the defensive line definitely talent is the word to use when looking at that unit. You got a lot of extremely good athletes all across that defensive line. even the front seven as a whole. My biggest issue so far watching them is you had mentioned a little bit about Southern Miss, being a little bit exotic with the way that they use that front seven. That's an issue I've had with Texas A&M so far, where it's felt like the defensive fronts just haven't been anything crazy. There's the absence of Mike Elko from the past few seasons, and he's over there at Duke. They're 2-0 to start the season, so shout out Mike Elko a little bit for that. But I just haven't seen the type of production that I'd want to see out of that defensive line, especially considering the opponents that Texas A&M has faced so far. Although that App State offensive line is very, very solid.
Mm-hmm.
But in the first game, there was a lot of production, especially in the run game, getting back there, got a ton of tackle for losses, and just a lot of production in terms of just, getting pressure in the run game. But there hasn't been a lot of pressure in the passing game in either time. And I haven't seen a lot of anything fancy going on with the fronts. And
Mm-hmm.
so, once again, it could always be something that they're still working on. It's DJ Durkin's first year. One thing that's interesting about DJ Durkin, he had talked about before the season when they said, "Hey, what kind of defense do you want to run?" He said, "I don't know. I want my defense around the players I have." I kind of looked into it a little bit. He's definitely run some different stuff from one stop to another stop. He's coached for a bunch of different teams over his time, but he's probably still kind of trying to figure out exactly what he wants to get out of this Texas A&M team. A lot of talent, but I still think there's some execution that needs to, turn into production. And so let's turn over to the other side of the ball. A&M's offense has been the downside of the team so far this season. There just hasn't been much production at all. But I want to see how they face up against the defensive unit that is at Miami. So, kind of talk a little bit about what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses to the Miami defense so far.
For sure. So I think I'm a little higher than most on Miami's defense thus far. I've liked what I saw, especially in that second half against Southern Miss, or actually, for that matter, from quarters 2 through 4 against Southern Miss. That unit was just elite. Aside from a few plays here and there, I mean, the unit was very, very good. Strength, de two main strengths of the defense to watch out for talent wise or high end, top level talent, safety room. A lot of really, really good talent there, led by James Williams, the number one safety from that 2021 recruiting class. He is good. He is very, very good. Just an absolute physical and athletic freak, 6'5", can run very well. He's used in a multitude of different ways. He's used as a single high safety, just as a center fielder of that defense. He's also used sometimes as an outside linebacker, even as a middle linebacker, just because he is so athletic for his height, 6'5", so he can really stuff running gaps when he's asked to. Just been very tremendous this far. Some other safeties, Cam Kitchens, another sophomore, has been very good. Wante Williams, someone that hasn't been as productive as expected to begin the 2022 season, but is someone that had very high expectations for leading this year. And he's someone that I think will continue developing very nicely as the season progresses. And another strength is the defensive line. So much depth there. A very deep defensive line unit that added a bunch of new talent in that room throughout the offseason. They added 3 very talented recruits and 5 instant impact transfers, which just bolstered the room. I mean, that's a unit that can go 6, 7 deep at both inside and on the edge. I'll say one thing though, in that the line definitely lacks a proven high-end pass rusher. There are guys that have shown before that they could be a solid pass rusher, that they can rush the passer productively, but nothing elite. Just some guys will mention Akeem Mesidor, who missed that Southern Miss game, but was sensational in that first game against Bethune-Cookman. Transfer from West Virginia. He had, I think, 5.5 sacks last year. Someone who can play both inside and on the edge. Leonard Taylor, who was one of the top defensive linemen in that 2021 class. really started to come on strong at the end of his freshman season last year. Has played very well so far as a sophomore. And then another name I'll throw out, Darrell Jackson, just a physical freak, like I mentioned earlier with James Williams. He is 6'6", 300 pounds, but just like super lean. Uh, Another defensive lineman on the team, Chance Williams, described him as a freak of nature because that's what he is. Just a sensational lineman in the as a run mauler. And I mean the D tackle combination between Jackson and Leonard Taylor is just sensational for Miami so far. And weaknesses of the team. So I will say cornerback. I mentioned earlier with the lack of a solid outside number two corner, and that has definitely been a struggle for the team thus far. I'm curious to see lineup wise if anything changes from week 2 to week 3. And then linebackers who have been solid thus far, thus against, or albeit against two much weaker opponents than what Miami will see in week 3. But that was considered the weakness of the defense heading in. And a lot of that is contributed to the fact that the unit as a whole was very under recruited under the previous coaching staff at Miami. It really didn't bring in Power 5 talent for about 6 years. And while the current coaching staff has done everything they could to really rectify this, it's going to take multiple recruiting cycles to fix this. So linebackers, talent-wise, are not really where they need to be for Miami to contend at a serious level.
Yeah, and when I look at Texas A&M's offense, I think that what they want to do is just run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. They
Yeah.
haven't been able to do it to the best of their ability so far because there's been some offensive line struggles getting gaps for Devon Achane at running back, the type of player that you give him one hole and he can take it as far as he wants to,
Mm-hmm.
as far as the angles allow him to, basically. And you just haven't been able to see those creases open the way that you'd want to. And then
Mm-hmm.
part of that is the inexperience at offensive line, a lot of young guys, a lot of really good recruits, but a lot of young guys, and they're still kind of getting their wings under them a little bit. And so I think about that the passing attack is not the strong suit of A&M, especially not at this point of the season. You don't have the proven number one wide receiver. Anaya Smith has been very solid so far to start the season, but he kind of was a little bit quiet in game 2. And then Evan Stewart has come along for sure. And I think that he definitely will be a focal point of the team this season. And it'll be interesting to see how Miami kind of tries to match up at wide receiver and corner because Anaya Smith will, try and create mismatches in the middle of the field, lining up in the slot. Evan Stewart, will he take on the number one guy from Miami? And so I'm definitely interested to kind of see how that works. Now, let's kind of look at a little bit of the expectations for week 3. Um, Look at how Miami's team has performed so far this season and what you know about Texas A&M, and tell me where do you think each team will have to capitalize to win the game?
Yeah, so for Miami, I will say that they'll have to capitalize in the middle of the field. My Texas A&M knowledge isn't where it needs to be by game day, but I do know that Texas A&M's linebackers aren't great compared to some of the rest of the defense, and an area where App State really excelled was, running outside the tackle, kind of attacking in space. And that's what Miami will have to do. One thing that I haven't loved about the run game is that, and one thing that I guess kind of concerns me about Miami's run game is that it's a mix of power and zone blocking, right? But I've seen too much power, and I don't think that necessarily fits with what Miami's personnel does best. I think this is more of a finesse blocking team. This is a team that has athletic tackles and athletic guards who are good at pulling and just attacking open space, and and guys who are excel in a zone blocking scheme, guys who excel at blocking space instead of blocking guys one on one. So I think we will see Miami try to attack Texas A&M in space. rather than just mano y mano like that. So, and then the flip side of things, just Texas A&M needs to find somewhat consistent production at the quarterback position. Haynes King hasn't been particularly great as of late, or through the first two games. I think that's a pretty mild way of putting how he's played, and they just need more from that position, whether it's him, whether it's LSU transfer Max Johnson, who I like a lot more than King. I will say, as a college football watcher, but no matter who starts, they just need more consistent production from that position, and they need to find a way to generate points because I think that Texas A&M's defense will limit what Miami does offensively, but vice versa, A&M needs to find a way to put points, and they have the weapons to. They just need the quarterback to, put them in the right spots to succeed.
I mentioned this to you pre-show, but if Jimbo Fisher could win every game 7-0, he'd gladly do so. But that's
Mhm.
just not how college football works nowadays. And I'll tip my hand. I have been on the Max Johnson train the entire time, and I definitely want to see him at some point this season. I think that he can provide a different style of play that could, ignite the offense. Because you have Haynes King, who is a very capable player out of structure. He brings kind of like a different energy that Max Johnson wouldn't be able to provide necessarily. But at the same time, Max Johnson isn't a bad athlete on his own.
Yeah.
And at the same time, at some point, you just need production. And even if Max Johnson is a little bit game managey compared to the way that Haynes King plays,
Mhm.
sometimes you just need production. And if that's what's going to get the ball down the field, you just got to get the ball down the field and score points. You
Exactly.
haven't been able to be getting that out there. So let's go ahead and get into some predictions real quick to tie, a nice little bow on this. I'm not going to make you give a score prediction, but kind of just how you think this game's going to pan out. Again, I'll tip my hand. I had Miami winning this game going into the season. App State didn't give me a lot of confidence in this. I think Miami's going to be able to pull this off, even at Kyle Field. But I think it's going to be a good game, and it has to be a good game if Texas A&M wants to stay competitive this season.
Yeah, I will. I'll give a score prediction. Why not? I'll give a score prediction. It could very well. I honestly, I probably expect it to change. The closer I get to game day, the more research that I do on this game. But Miami, and granted, this is a new coaching staff, but still, you do have to look at history, especially recent history. Miami has really, really, really struggled against very good teams on the road. They haven't been a good road team for my entire life. So, with that in mind, and given that A&M does have the advantages in the trenches, which is obviously very important, I think A&M wins 27-21. If you would ask me if you would ask me to give a score prediction for the season, I probably would have said something along the lines of 34-17 Texas A&M. But given what I've seen from both squads through the first two games, I think it's gonna be a little closer. Miami could definitely win this game. They absolutely can. They have the talent to, especially at the most important position, which of course is quarterback. But I just think Texas A&M has the advantage in the trenches, and if Jimbo calls the right game and a game that's more power oriented, I think A&M will win.
Yeah, I keep calling this game a litmus test. It's going to show exactly what A&M is going to be this season. I think this is the most pivotal game of the season, especially, going into week 4. That's Arkansas at Jerry World. Very important
Yeah.
game. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. I want to say thank you so much for, coming on here, Luke. I'm giving you the platform real quick to shout out anything that you want.
Yeah, for sure, man. So go ahead and for whoever's listening, check out the Miami Hurricane. Like I said, University of Miami student-run newspaper. We do really good work at the sports section. Me and my assistant sports editor, Chris Damon. Chris is a goat, and we do good work there. And then for most of my content, check me out at All Hurricanes. If you want some Miami coverage during this week, great group of writers who put out some really good work. So check me out at Hurricanes and at the Miami Hurricane, the Hurricane. So thank you, man. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. And before we wrap this up, I want to say make sure you check out some of the other podcasts that are on the Battalions Network. There is the Bat Signal, the News podcast, and then there's an upcoming Life and Arts podcast too. That's going to be very fun. Make sure you check those out. And thanks again for getting on here, and I'll see y'all later.